Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take information you're curious about and really dig in to find those valuable insights.
That's the plan.
Today, we're tackling something I think is, well, really relevant for a lot of you pushing for better times, maybe like the folks following the 5K runner.
Absolutely.
How do you train effectively, push hard, but without constantly getting injured?
Right. It's the age-old question for runners. And today we've got some interesting stuff to look at.
Yeah. What's on the menu?
We're looking at Garmin's running tolerance feature, digging into the science behind impact load in running, and we'll even touch on how others, like iMeasureU, are measuring this kind of thing.
Okay, cool. So the mission is really to get clear on what this running tolerance thing is and maybe how you can actually use it to, well, run smarter.
Exactly. Making that data work for you.
All right, let's start with Garmin's running tolerance then. What's the basic idea?
Well, at its core, Garmin developed it to help runners spot, potentially risky training patterns.
Risky how? Like doing too much too soon?
Sort of, yeah. It's about managing that balance between stressing your body enough to adapt and improve, but not overdoing it to the point of breakdown. Getting a better handle on the physical stress, basically.
Okay, so it's trying to quantify that stress beyond just how many miles you run. Because we all know a hard tempo feels way different than an easy recovery jog.
Precisely. And that's where their concept of impact load comes in. They're trying to measure the actual mechanical load, the force on your body.
Not just distance.
Not just distance. Think muscles, joints, tendons, the whole system. The key takeaway isn't just the distance, but the stress. A short, intense run effectively counts for more.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense, but how does my watch figure that out? It's not exactly a biomechanics lab on my wrist.
No, not quite. But it's pretty clever. Garmin uses your data weight, obviously, how hard you're running.
Pace, heart rate zones, that sort of thing?
Yeah, intensity metrics, and also running dynamics if you've got the right gear, like a compatible heart rate strap.
So cadence, ground contact time.
Exactly. And they even factor in hills, uphill, downhill. All that gets fed into what they describe as sophisticated tech, like a neural network, to estimate the ground reaction forces.
Wow, okay. Neural network. So it's estimating the pounding based on all these inputs.
That's the idea. And from that estimation, they calculate what they call equivalent mileage.
Equivalent mileage. What does that mean in practice?
Well, their examples suggest like a tough 5-mile run with significant hills might have an impact load equivalent to maybe 8 miles of flat, easy running.
8 miles. Okay, that's a big difference.
It is. And conversely, maybe an easy 3-miler comes out as only 2.5 impact miles. They also really stress that downhill running can massively increase impact.
How much?
Potentially up to 3 times harder than running flat at the same pace, according to their info.
3 times.
Yeah.
Right. That definitely feels true sometimes. So the takeaway is clear. The type of run dramatically changes the stress.
Exactly. Short and hard equals more stress. And you can actually see this, right? In Garmin Connect after a run.
Yeah, they provide a chart, shows the impact load throughout the run. You can see where the spikes were.
Which is useful for understanding which parts were most demanding.
Okay, so that's impact load for a single run, but then there's acute load and tolerance. Sounds like they work together.
They do. Think of acute impact load as the running stress you've built up recently. It's a weighted sum of the impact from your runs over the last few days.
Weighted, meaning recent runs count more.
Precisely. The impact from yesterday's run contributes more than the run from 5 days ago. It reflects that current strain, how your body is coping right now. So if impact load is the stress of one session.
Acute load is the running total of stress lately.
You got it. Like the current balance on your stress account.
Okay. And tolerance, is that like my credit limit?
That's a great analogy, actually. Yeah, tolerance is your body's current capacity to handle that acute load. It's personal, based on your running history.
My history, like long term.
Both recent and longer term patterns. It adjusts weekly. If you've been training consistently, your tolerance, your credit limit goes up. If you take time off or reduce volume, it goes down.
Right. So if my acute load, my current stress balance, gets close to or goes over my tolerance limit, alarm bells.
It's a caution flag, definitely. Garmin frames it as a signal to be mindful, not necessarily stop running immediately, but more like, hey, pay attention, maybe ease back.
Because consistently going over that limit is where injury risk climbs.
That seems to be the implication, yes. Pushing beyond your current capacity repeatedly is asking for trouble.
But wait, you need to push to improve, right, to increase that tolerance.
Absolutely, and the system reflects that. Consistently training, appropriately challenging yourself without overdoing it, should gradually increase your tolerance over time. That's how you build fitness safely, according to this model.
And decrease volume tolerance drops. Makes sense. Where do I see this on my watch?
Usually there's a running tolerance glance or widget, and you can often see it within the context of your training week summary screen.
Got it. This sounds genuinely useful for planning. How does this connect to the broader scientific picture of impact in running?
Yeah, great question. This ties in really well with research like that study reducing impact loading in runners.
Okay, what did that study look at?
Well, scientists know that higher vertical impact loading, basically how hard your foot hits the ground and how quickly that force travels up your leg, is linked to common running injuries.
Like stress fractures, shin
Yeah.
splints, runner's knee.
Exactly. Stress fractures, patellofemoral pain, plantar fasciitis. So this study aimed to see if they could actually teach runners with high impact forces to run softer.
Teach them how.
Through gait retraining, they measured how hard runners were landing using accelerometers on their shins.
Measuring tibial shock, that jarring feeling.
Precisely, tibial shock. They also measured the vertical impact peak, the max force, and crucially, the rate at which that force builds up, the loading rate.
So how quickly the impact hits, not just the peak force itself. That sounds like what iMeasureU looks at too, right? With their sensors?
Yes, exactly. Similar concept. iMeasureU uses their IMUs to capture cumulative lower limb impacts, and loading rate is a key factor there too.
So how did the retraining work in the study?
They had a control period first, then the retraining phase where runners got real-time feedback on their tibial shock.
Like a beep or a display telling them if they were landing too hard?
Something like that, yeah. Visual or auditory cues. Then they gradually faded that feedback out, hoping the runners would internalize the changes.
And did it work? Did they learn to run softer?
Yeah, the results were pretty impressive. They found significant reductions in tibial shock, that vertical impact peak, and those vertical loading rates.
How significant?
Tibial shock dropped by around 32% on average. And importantly, these changes lasted. They checked again a year later, and the runners were still running with lower impact.
A year later. Wow. That's sticky. Did everything reduce?
Interestingly, the peak vertical force didn't change much, which might suggest they weren't necessarily pushing off less hard, but maybe changing how they landed to absorb the force more smoothly. Better mechanics.
Fascinating. And does lower impact mean fewer injuries? Did they track that?
This specific study focused on the biomechanics, but they highlighted the strong link found in other research. They mentioned a randomized controlled trial where gait retraining to reduce impact led to significantly fewer injuries. I think it was something like 62% fewer.
62%. Okay, that's huge. So the science definitely backs up the idea that managing impact is critical.
Absolutely. And the study also found correlations between the tibial shock measured by the sensor and those loading rates, which kind of suggests that what wearable devices can measure might be a decent proxy for these important biomechanical forces.
Which links back to what Garmin is trying to estimate, and maybe even to discussions you see on sites like the 5K Runner about using tech data.
Exactly. It suggests that tracking something related to impact, even if it's an estimate like Garmin's or a direct measurement like iMeasureU's, is valuable.
So speaking of iMeasureU, how does their approach compare or contrast with Garmin's? You mentioned they also measure impact load.
Right. iMeasureU uses their wearable IMU sensors, usually worn on the shins, to directly quantify the cumulative impacts. Their impact load metric is essentially calculated from the number of steps multiplied by the intensity of each impact.
So more of a direct count of the hits, scaled by intensity.
That's a good way to think about it. It's a direct measure of the accumulation of impacts during activity, whereas Garmin is estimating the overall biomechanical load using a wider range of inputs like pace, dynamics, elevation, and user profile data fed into their algorithm.
Different paths to a similar goal.
Yeah.
Quantifying stress.
Pretty much. It's also interesting that iMeasureU distinguishes their impact load from another metric they have called bone stimulus.
Bone stimulus. How's that different?
Impact load is more linear. More steps or harder steps equals more load. Bone stimulus tries to model the actual physiological response of the bone to that loading, which isn't perfectly linear. Bones respond differently to different patterns and types of stress.
Okay. So even more nuance in how the body adapts.
Exactly. But the big picture is that both Garmin, with its integrated watch features potentially boosted by accessories like the HRM Pro, and specialized tools like iMeasureU are giving runners ways to understand these forces.
Which fits right into that goal of smarter training, the kind of thing someone aiming for a 5K PB, like many following the 5K runner, would be really interested in.
Totally. It's about having more information to make better decisions, manage load, stay consistent, and ultimately perform better. Consistency is king, right? And managing impact helps you stay consistent.
Definitely. Okay, let's bring it all together. What are the key practical takeaways for you, the listener, from all this?
Well, first, if you have a compatible Garmin device, start actually using the running tolerance feature. Don't just let it be another data screen.
Pay attention to it.
Yeah. See how the reported impact load for different runs, hills, speed work, easy runs, matches how you feel. Look at how your acute load tracks against your tolerance over Wix. Does it make sense with your fatigue levels?
Treat it like another feedback signal from your body, but quantified.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, it doesn't replace listening to your actual body.
The data is a tool, not the absolute truth.
Precisely. If you feel pain, persistent niggles, or excessive fatigue, don't ignore that just because your watch says your acute load is productive or within tolerance.
Yeah.
Use the data alongside your intuition and feelings.
Good point. Trust your gut, too.
Always. But the science is clear. Managing impact load is important for staying healthy. And staying healthy is fundamental if you want to train consistently and improve, which is obviously a core goal for performance-focused runners.
Right. So, summing up, Garmin's running tolerance is this tool trying to quantify running stress using biomechanical principles, looking beyond just mileage. Science backs up the importance of managing impact. And other tools like iMeasureU offer different, maybe more direct ways to measure similar things.
That's a great summary. It all points towards more informed training.
So the final thought to leave you with: how might actively tracking and understanding your own impact load, maybe using Garmin's features, maybe exploring other tools like iMeasureU if you want to go deeper, how might that change the way you approach your training?
Yeah, think about it. Could it change how you structure your week, how you approach hard sessions, or even influence looking into your running form, like those runners in the study who learned to run softer? What adjustments might you consider based on knowing more about the impact your running creates?
Food for thought, especially if you're keen on optimizing form and minimizing injury risk. Maybe exploring date retraining or biomechanics could be a really interesting avenue.
Definitely worth considering if you want to maximize your running health and potential.